The weight was invisible but constant, a metaphorical crown pressing not on my head, but on my soul, shaping every breath, every movement into a continuous performance for an unseen audience of expectations and traditions. My existence was defined by pre-existing contours, boundaries I hadn't drawn, but within which I was compelled to reside, smile, and function without apparent fault. There was a superficial beauty around me, an impeccable polish that concealed the underlying rigidity, the lack of spontaneity that stifled any genuine impulse. Every interaction felt scripted, every gesture measured, creating a bubble of gilded isolation that separated me from the natural flow of life I could only observe from afar, like a spectator in my own theater. The sensation of being a figure, a symbol more than a real person, was a persistent chill in the depths of my chest, a loneliness inherent to the position that kept me elevated and, at the same time, imprisoned. Desires and thoughts that didn't fit the established mold were suppressed, pushed into the silent corners of my mind where they could exist without the relentless judgment of the very structure that defined me. There was a silent hunger for something authentic, something raw and real that contrasted with the manufactured perfection of my daily life. A part of me wondered if this life was all there was, if fulfillment was a forbidden concept for someone in my position. The longing for a connection unmediated by titles or protocols grew, a desire to simply be rather than perpetually appear. It was a subtle state of existential anomie, living a life many might envy from the outside, but which, from within, seemed to lack a vital element, a fundamental truth that was absent. And that absence was the hook, the crack in the perfect wall of my world that held me captive and made me question the invisible cost of that crown. That silent hunger for something authentic, that yearning for a reality unmediated by protocols and appearances, found its point of resonance in a completely unexpected way. It didn't come through a grand entrance or a formal announcement, as everything in my world was accustomed to being. It manifested subtly at first, a fissure in the polished perfection of my daily life, allowing something genuine and unadorned to shine through. It was the contact with a different energy, a presence that radiated unpretentious simplicity and a truth that contrasted sharply with the calculated complexity of my existence. It was as if, for the first time, I could breathe air unfiltered by others' expectations, pure air that filled my lungs in a way that was both invigorating and frightening. This exposure to simplicity, whether embodied in someone or glimpsed in a way of life, acted as a catalyst, accelerating the internal questioning process already underway. Suddenly, the weight of the crown felt even heavier, the gilded cage even more suffocating, because now I had a real comparison. The superficial beauty of my world lost its luster in the face of the authenticity I had encountered. A brutal dichotomy settled within me. On one side, the predetermined path, the undeniable responsibility, and the, albeit oppressive, security of my role. On the other, the tantalizing promise of emotional freedom and a genuine connection that seemed to beckon from a distant horizon. This encounter, or this revelation of the possibility of a different life, made continuing my previous existence unbearable. The tipping point had been reached. What was once a silent longing transformed into a powerful impulse, an urgent need to explore this new direction, even if it meant dismantling the structure of everything I knew. The seed of the trade had been planted, sprouting with a force I didn't know how to contain, nor whether I truly wanted to. The decision, or its inevitability, hung in the rarefied air between my two worlds. The brutal dichotomy that had settled within me in Act 1. Middle couldn't coexist with reality for long. The intensity of the contrast between the life awaiting me under the crown and the tantalizing promise of genuine simplicity made the old path unsustainable. There came a point where the internal pressure, the urgency to align my external existence with the deep yearning that had awakened, became more powerful than the weight of expectations and the fear of the unknown. It was a battle fought entirely within the confines of my own consciousness, a silent confrontation between duty and desire, between manufactured security and uncertain freedom. And at the climax of this solitary struggle, the choice became inevitable, not so much an active decision, but a surrender to an inner truth I could no longer deny. The moment of the trade lacked pomp or ceremony. It was an intimate act, a severance from the past that felt as much like liberation as it did like amputation. Leaving behind the world that defined me, the structure that sustained me, however, rigidly, was like peeling off a second skin that had become part of me, painful and strangely relieving at the same time. There was a void left by the absence of the familiar weight of the crown, a frightening lightness in the space once occupied by routine and protocol. But in that void, in that newly created space, there was also the first truly free breath I could remember taking. The step towards simplicity wasn't toward a clearly defined or secure place. It was a leap of faith into uncertain terrain, guided only by the magnetic pull of the authenticity I had glimpsed. The uncertainty was immense, and fear was a constant companion, but the feeling of finally being on the right path, my own path, however thorny and unknown, was a profound comfort. The Rubicon had been crossed. The bridge to my old world was burned. I was no longer the figure defined by the crown, but Anastasia, navigating toward a life whose only promise was to be real. Act 1 was complete. The journey of consequences had just begun. The frightening lightness felt upon shedding the weight of the crown in Act 1, and quickly gave way to a different, unexpected complexity, equally demanding in its nature. Stepping into the reality I had chosen was like learning to walk on terrain with rules and gravity entirely different from what I knew. The absence of the rigid structure and constant support that once surrounded every aspect of my life left, a void that wasn't just freedom, but also a lack of familiar reference points. Things I never had to consider or do for myself became daily obstacles, requiring an energy and attention that were new to me. There was a subtle disorientation in having to navigate basic tasks, a strange ineptitude for the mundane that my former life had rendered invisible. Every small need or responsibility of the simple life presented a new kind of challenge, and the superficial polish I maintained by habit began to wear away in the face of the rawness of this new existence. Still, amidst this clumsy adaptation, there was an undeniable authenticity. The air, though sometimes harsh with practical reality, was no longer filtered by pretense. Interactions, few and far between, carried no weight of protocol, allowing a way of being I had never experienced. The presence of the simple love, the catalyst for this radical change, became the calm center of this new reality, a constant amidst my own uncertainty and the challenges of adaptation. The way we related shifted. We were no longer defined by the contrast of our worlds, but by the joint construction of a new one. There was a mutual learning, a silent patience, as I stumbled through aspects of life that were innate to the other. I began to understand that the simplicity I craved wasn't the absence of effort, but the absence of falsehood, and that this absence came with its own set of demands and rewards, which I was only now beginning to unravel, one day at a time. The initial adaptation to life without the crown in Act 2. Beginning gave way to a period of deeper, more persistent challenges that tested the solidity of the choice I had made. The absence of the previous structure didn't mean the absence of difficulties. On the contrary, it revealed a new set of complexities for which I was unprepared. The simplicity I sought manifested not as an absence of problems, but as a different set of them, requiring a type of strength and resilience my privileged past hadn't cultivated. The weight of my former life, though physically distant, seemed to cast a long shadow, drawing unwanted attention or creating obstacles that were echoes of the world I had left behind. It was as if the very structure I had fled refused to fully release me, exerting a subtle but constant pressure on the new reality I was trying to build. This external pressure and the inherent difficulties of my new existence placed a strain on the partnership that had become my foundation. Though the simple love was an inexhaustible source of authenticity and support, living with the consequences of my decision imposed its own challenges on the relationship. There were moments when the disparity between our backgrounds felt more pronounced, where the weight of my past threatened to overwhelm the simplicity of our present. Navigating these waters required an even deeper silent communication, a capacity to understand the pressures the other also faced by standing by my side in this new life. Each obstacle overcome, each moment of tension traversed, strengthened the bond, transforming the partnership into something more resilient, forged in the joint overcoming of the difficulties imposed by my trade. My internal struggle with identity also intensified. To whom did I belong now? To the Anastasia who had renounced her destiny, or the Anastasia who still carried the invisible marks of the crown? The conflict between who I was and who I was becoming was a constant battlefield within my own mind. The comfort of authenticity was real, but the vulnerability that came with the lack of protection and external judgment, or the anticipation of it, was equally present. With each new challenge, the stakes seemed to rise. It was no longer just about living a different life, but about proving that this choice was worth it, that love and simplicity were forces capable of enduring and prevailing against the complexities and pressures of the world I had defied. We were deeply immersed in the consequences of the trade, and the path ahead seemed increasingly uncertain and demanding. The escalation of pressures and challenges that marked Act 2, middle culminated in a devastating moment of crisis, a breaking point where the fragility of my choice and the persistence of the world I had left behind collided with full force. It wasn't a stumble or a passing setback, but a collapse that seemed to sweep the very ground from under my feet, undoing the fragile stability I had managed to build. The long shadow of the crown finally caught up with me in an undeniable way, bringing consequences that felt disproportionate and overwhelming. The force I had underestimated or perhaps naively hoped would let me go manifested in a way that struck at the core of the life I had chosen, threatening to destroy not only me, but also what had become most precious: the authenticity and connection forged in simplicity. In this whirlwind of losses and threats, the partnership that was my safe harbor was placed under immense pressure, tested by forces that seemed intent on pulling us apart, exploiting the cracks created by our contrasting origins and the cost of my renunciation. There was a moment of terrible loneliness, even with the other nearby, a feeling of being isolated by the magnitude of the mistake my choice might have represented. The weight of the crown, which I thought I had left behind, seemed to return with a vengeance, crushing the lightness I had found. Questioning everything became inevitable. Was authenticity worth this cost? Was simple love strong enough to bear such a burden? I fell into an abyss of doubt and despair, feeling lost in a desolate terrain where neither the world of the crown nor the simple world seemed to offer refuge. It was the darkest point, the bitterest consequence of my trade, and the sensation of hitting rock bottom was absolute, leaving me in a state of extreme vulnerability, unsure if there was strength or even a path to emerge from there. The abrupt fall in Act 2 left a chilling void and the sense of absolute failure. But even in the depths of that abyss of despair, the spark of the truth found in simplicity didn't entirely extinguish. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it persisted. Slowly, painfully, I began to pull myself out of the inertia of defeat. It wasn't a quick or easy process. Every thought, every movement was an effort against the gravity of despair that held me. But the memory of what I had felt beside that presence, the pure, unadorned authenticity that contrasted so sharply with the polished falsehood of my former life, became the tenuous thread I clung to. Rejecting defeat wasn't just a matter of pride. It was about honoring the choice I had made, validating the cost I had paid, and protecting what had become infinitely more valuable to me than any crown. The connection with the presence at my side, which seemed momentarily lost in the turbulence of the crisis, reignited stronger and quieter than before. We didn't need to verbalize the depth of the setback or the difficulty of recovery. Mutual understanding hung in the air between us, a shared recognition of the pain and resilience. This renewed union, forged in the furnace of near defeat, became the source of strength that allowed me to face what had happened, not as the end, but as the necessary prelude to the final confrontation. The doubt about the worth of my choice didn't vanish entirely, but it was overshadowed by a cold, cutting resolve. If my renunciation and the love I found had provoked such a reaction from the world I had left, or whatever represented the oppressive force, then it was imperative to face that force directly, not to prove my worth to others, but to validate my own truth. All the remaining energy, all the determination I could muster, focused singularly on the challenge ahead. There was nowhere left to run, only the need to move forward with cruel clarity and unwavering resolve toward the apex. The cold, cutting resolve that propelled me in Act 3. Beginning guided me, alongside the constant presence that had become my foundation, directly into the epicenter of the force that had caused the collapse at the end of Act 2. It wasn't a physical place, but a point of convergence of all the pressures, doubts, and oppositions my choice had provoked. We entered this space of final confrontation, and the intensity I felt surpassed anything I had experienced before. It was the culmination of everything, the definitive test of the worth of my renunciation and the strength of the simple love I had chosen. The opposing forces manifested not as something tangible, but as an overwhelming resistance, an immense weight that seemed intent on pushing me back to the life I had left or breaking me entirely for daring to defy its dominion. It was a battle of wills, of contrasting realities colliding at the most critical point. All my energy, all my conviction in the authenticity and simplicity I had found was channeled into this clash. The presence at my side was essential. We didn't fight as two, but as an indivisible unit, our combined strength amplified by the depth of our connection, forged in overcoming. There were moments of pure anguish where the pressure felt unbearable, and the temptation to give in, to question everything again, was overwhelming. I fought against the internal voices echoing the judgments of the world I had left, and against the external resistance trying to suffocate me. There was no room for anything but the confrontation. The world reduced to this single point of maximum tension, and then, at the height of this existential struggle, in an instant that seemed to condense the entire journey, something fundamental shifted. It wasn't a loud victory, but a sudden quietness, a silent recognition that the strength of my choice, validated by the resilience of simple love and the depth of our union, had prevailed against the opposition. The climax was complete. The balance had tipped toward the life I had chosen, not without cost, but with an undeniable truth. The quietness that followed the apex of the confrontation in Act 3. Middle wasn't a mere return to silence, but a vibrant absence of the pressure that had surrounded me for so long. It was as if the air were lighter, the space around me finally free of the oppressive force I had faced. The intensity subsided, leaving behind a deep exhaustion mingled with a sense of relief and a crystalline clarity I had never possessed. The reality around us settled into a new pattern, altered by the energy released in that final clash. It wasn't the world of the crown, nor the initially idealized version of simplicity. It was something new, forged in crisis and overcoming, a space where the authenticity I sought could finally exist without the constant threat of being crushed. The scars of the journey were internal, invisible marks of the cost of my choice and the battle fought to defend it. Looking at the presence at my side, who had been my foundation through it all, I felt the silent confirmation that we had traversed the furnace together and emerged on the other side. The communication between us transcended the need for words, rooted in a mutual understanding of the depth of the shared experience. There were no more doubts about the worth of my choice. The simple love that drew me away from the crown proved its strength and resilience by enduring and overcoming the final test. The renunciation hadn't been in vain. The price paid was high, but the reward, the freedom to be, the depth of connection, and the authenticity of the life we built was immeasurable. I had found my place, not on a throne or in a utopian refuge, but in the concrete, genuine reality I had fought to achieve. The journey of the trade was complete. I was no longer the princess under the crown, nor merely someone seeking simplicity, but Anastasia, living the truth forged in the heart of the conflict. The main story had reached its end, with the quietness of the aftermath spreading around us. Time moved differently after the climax, more calmly, without the constant urgency that defined the journey through the metaphorical or literal storm, the silence that settled after the pressure subsided in Act 3. End wasn't a void, but a space filled with the quietness and tangible reality of the life I had chosen and fought to maintain. With each passing day, the memory of the crown, of the weight it represented and the world that surrounded it, seemed more distant, almost like a complex dream I had once had. The marks of the crossing were there, etched in how I saw and interacted with the world, in the silent strength I knew I possessed, and in the unwavering way I trusted the presence at my side. There was no going back, only moving forward in this reality that was mine, conquered step by step. The life we shared, stripped of the complexity and artificiality of my past, revealed its own beauty and depth in the simplest details. The authenticity I craved and that drew me away from my predetermined destiny wasn't an absence of challenges, but a constant presence of truth. I learned that simplicity wasn't synonymous with ease, but with honesty. Honesty with myself and with the other. The partnership forged in the fire of adversity settled into a tranquil understanding, a silent language that spoke volumes about what we had overcome together. I was no longer the princess under the crown, seeking something missing. I was Anastasia, living a life that, though devoid of the titles or material wealth of before, was rich in meaning and connection. The choice I made, the sacrifice I paid, and the battle I fought didn't lead me to a traditional fairy tale ending, but to something more valuable. A genuine reality where love and authenticity weren't the reward at the journey's end, but the very foundation upon which the journey continued day by day, in the quiet certainty of having found our true place.